Hey, Jonny here, and on this project, my wife requests yet another build. But while she was really excited about this project, I was having my own struggles.
Andy, what is it with doors that I seem to have the most trouble?
Right away, I want to be very honest with y'all about something. After the last build, making that skull tambour cabinet, I had a lot of trouble getting excited for this build. And I was basically the opposite of my wife, where she was really excited. This is a piece that she's been wanting in her home, but she wanted something somewhat practical, functional, elegant. And in my head, I'm just hearing no skulls, nothing jazzy, no Star Wars theme, no koi fish. I'm going to be forced to build something simple, functional, and classy. How the hell am I going to do that? So I started like I often do by researching different design elements, shapes, styles, what have you, in order to find a starting point. But that's when I came across this bookcase. This is a legitimate 1960s original mid-century modern piece by renowned designer Paul McCoy. And this piece looked pristine. I mean, of course it should be pristine, considering the seller wants $11,500 for a rare Paul McCoy original. And I thought to myself, this is a really nice piece that fits all of Katie's requests, so this is just a good reference as I start designing my own piece. But when I showed my wife this design that I intended only to gather some inspiration from, she said,
I want that one.
Now, despite my protest, despite telling her how crazy and badass of a piece of furniture I could build, I'm thinking flames and hidden compartments and skulls everywhere, more flames. Of course I'm gonna paint it solid black. I'm gonna build the world's most insane heavy metal badass bookcase. But Katie insists.
No, just build that one.
So that's how I ended up trying to replicate this piece instead of building something else. Although I don't just want to replicate it. I have to put my own spin on it. I have to do something that makes me excited about this build. So I am going to try some new woodworking techniques and use this as an excuse to buy some new tools. I'm building this for my wife, so she can't get upset about that. And I'm gonna see if I could create something even nicer than that original Paul McCoy piece. So that's what I'll be attempting today. I'm gonna build my own version out of red oak, and that's what you've seen me do so far. I'm getting all this red oak lumber cut and glued up into all the panels that I need to build this thing. I don't know. I keep calling it a bookcase, but it's not really a bookcase. It will store books, but this isn't the type of piece you're gonna typically load up end to end with books. More of a storage hutch type piece for a couple well-placed books. The ones that you wanna leave out to make yourself look smart and or interesting, like Animal Farm or War and Peace or my Mad Magazine collection. And then the rest is decorated with something like flowers or plants or little knickknacks or tchotchkes. Which, tchotchkes? How weird of a word is tchotchkes? And the first thing I want to do to make it different than the original piece is do some sort of interesting set of doors on those lower cabinets. So I remembered that I had this maple burl slab that I bought from my friends over at Worldwide Burl, and I thought doing a book match glue up would make for some really interesting doors. And that's really the first issue that I had with building this piece and sort of that creative letdown that I was feeling after the last build. So as I'm making these doors, I'm desperately trying to jazz up this build. Just anything I can do to make it more exciting. And what's better than throwing in a burl slab that came from the Pacific Northwest, where all the best lumber in the world comes from? I'm also gonna pour black epoxy to fill in all the negative space. But before I do that, I need to get those live edges all cleaned up. And with these doors, the idea is to have continuous grain that carries across the two cabinets. And speaking of which, though I'd rather be building my own design, there are some things that I really do love about this piece. Now, first is the idea of playing with negative space. And this piece could more easily be built as a single unit. But the thing that really catches my eye about this is how these are two separate pieces, but truly it's just one piece of furniture. That negative space between each side is as much a part of the design as anything else. And that's something that I haven't yet explored in my own designs. And again, if I'm forced to build something that isn't my own design, I want to learn as much as I can about the technique and the design aesthetic to add some arrows to my own design quiver. And the second thing I love about this design is the balance of asymmetry within symmetry. When you look at this piece as a whole, it appears very symmetrical at first glance, but when you look closer, you realize the right side is larger than the left. Now, put these two cabinets side by side facing the wrong direction and the asymmetry becomes very obvious, but when nested next to each other, they fit like a puzzle and looks really cohesive. But in my version, that right side is actually 4 inches wider than the left. And you might be thinking, Jonny, you're just looking for excuses to get excited about this build. And to that, I'd say, yeah, you're 1,000% correct. So like I mentioned, I want to challenge myself on this build to try some new techniques. And I called up my buddy, Jonathan Katz-Moses, and I was getting his take on some cool joinery that I could try. And Jay Katz mentioned a center keyed box joint. And I think he might have actually invented this joint, I don't know, but it's actually kind of brilliant and it looks really good. So the issue with cutting in box joints is that unless you get a perfectly divisible dimension for the keys, you end up with box joints that don't match all the way around. And with box joints, that's fine, no one's ever gonna notice. But with that center keyed method, all those box joints are identical on all sides, and this is accomplished by leaving that center section or that center key larger than the outer joints, thus creating a unique looking box joint. And I really hope that makes sense. I mean, I'm sure it will as I make these. And I could have just carved all these on the CNC, but I have to do something that makes me feel alive. So I just cut out templates and I'll do this the old-fashioned way, using only power tools and no chisels. So I made these templates to get the proper width of the keys, but not the proper depth. And that's for a few reasons. One, I wanted to be able to dial in that dimension using a dado stack on the table saw. And two, the router was gonna leave me with rounded corners that I would have needed to square up anyway. And as I was getting set up, I realized I didn't have the zero clearance dado insert for this table saw, and I was about to run out to the local woodworking store and buy one. But then I remembered my buddy Daniel Dunlap, AKA the guy who started the war on Odie's oil. But anyways, I remembered that he makes and sells zero clearance inserts on Etsy, but he also sells his digital cut files for super cheap. I think I paid like $4 for the file, and I was able to make my own real quick. When I told him that I did this, he actually took it upon himself to make me a few more custom zero clearance inserts. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful, probably too pretty to use on my table saw, but I figured I would give him a shout out anyways, and I'm gonna throw a link down below if you wanna check it out for yourself. This isn't a sponsor, just my way of saying thanks to a fellow woodworker who makes an awesome product and was nice enough to send some out. So I mentioned I was using this build as an excuse to buy some new tools, and I figured if the wife gets the exact piece of furniture she wants, then I can justify getting this Festool router and accessory kit that I've had my eye on for a couple years now. And I know Festool is crazy expensive, and for that reason, I think a lot of folks love to hate on Festool, and that's fine. But one thing that I've learned over the years is that you end up spending less money over the long haul just buying the more expensive tool that does everything that you need it to versus, first buying the cheaper version and then upgrading later after you're frustrated with all its limitations. And I'm building the internal components of the lower cabinet using stop dados. So having this Festool router that works with the track system also allows me to get CNC level accuracy, but looks somewhat like a real woodworker in the process.
Okay, so these boxes are coming together really nicely. This center keyed box joint was definitely the right move. Now, I will admit there are some gaps. I think when I was running it over that dado stack, there was a couple times where, that dado stack, it's spinning at a high RPM. It kind of pulls the piece into it. So I kind of went a little bit too far, and I wasn't clamping it. I was just holding it down with my hands, mostly to save time. But because of that, I do have a couple gaps. I think they're gonna close up pretty nicely once I get this all clamped and glued together. And it should look good, and hopefully you won't even be able to tell. Once I get everything dry fit, then I'll come in and I'll measure that piece and get that fitment dialed in perfectly. And then after that, I can go back and cut in all the reliefs because, again, these are stop dados, meaning that dado doesn't go all the way to the front of the piece. This little groove right here allows this to kind of go past where that dado stops, and you can't even tell.
Now, I wanted to add a drawer to each lower cabinet, not so much that this piece needs it, but more because I wanted to echo that center keyed box joint somewhere else on the build. So I've got a couple scraps left over of some Purple Heart and some walnut, which the whole time I'm thinking this is probably not the proper combination of wood species to add to this particular build. But I really love the combination of Purple Heart and walnut. It's probably my favorite combination of any wood species. But I won't really know until the end if this is going to look okay or not. But regardless, I'm into it. So when I spoke to my buddy J. Katz Moses, he convinced me to use that center keyed box joint, but he also dropped a little hint about a box joint jig that he designed and sells. And he actually sent me one to try out. Again, this is another shameless plug for a woodworking friend who was kind enough to send me some free stuff in the hopes of getting a shout out. But y'all, I have to say this box joint jig is fantastic. Now it does require a bit of setup in the beginning, and it took me a while to get everything dialed in, and I did all that off camera. But once it's dialed in, you're able to make some really quick, really accurate box joints. So again, not a sponsor, but I try to always link the tools and equipment that I use in my videos, so I'll also drop a link for this guy down below. I get no kickback or affiliate commission for this, but it's just a really nice jig that I want y'all to know about. As I get these panels ready to glue into the lower cabinets, I knew that this was going to be a complicated glue up, but I think I underestimated how complicated. Now, I'd like to think over the last 7 years that I put together a really nice collection of woodworking clamps. I mean, it's rare that I don't have enough clamps or the right clamps for a job, but once again, I find myself forced to purchase new equipment, which is obviously the worst thing I have to do. But what I realized when I was planning this glue up was I would need clamping pressure on each box joint key in order to get this pulled together properly, which when I realized the number of clamps this was going to take, I knew that I was only going to be able to glue up half of one box at a time, and just gluing up these cabinets was going to take me at least a total of 4 days. And as I glue up the other side, the process is exactly the same, so I'll just speed through this part and tell you all about the next steps. Now, earlier you saw when I cut the box joint templates, I also cut a bunch of curved templates for the upright supports of the two sides, but now I've decided that I'm not going to use those templates. I mean, for one, I am glad that I went ahead and cut these templates because it gave me a chance to see the scale without wasting any wood. And once I saw the scale of the 1.5 inch wide uprights, I knew this was too skinny and it just wasn't going to look right. I mean, it looked good as I was modeling it, but in real world dimensions, it looked a bit goofy. So I went back to my design, sized those pieces up to 2 inches wide, and this time I just made the decision to cut these out on the CNC versus using templates like I originally planned. And I did this to save a bunch of time, as each one of those upright pieces also needs a stop dado to support the shelves once they're connected. And in order to do that, I would have had to make 2 sets of templates. So it just seems smarter at this point to cut these on the CNC. But in the past, I have had issues cutting red oak pieces like this in the CNC and end up with lots of tear out on the ends. So I'm trying something a little different this time. Instead of using tabs and cutting all the way through, I'm leaving about 1/4 inch of material. And then I'll cut these out on the bandsaw and then take those over to the router and flush trim those pieces back. And I really hated doing this because I challenged myself to use the CNC as little as possible on this build. And for some silly reason, people get really offended when technology is used in woodworking. And I know that I've talked about this before, and not to beat a dead horse, but I have some more thoughts on the subject, and I want to address that again real quick. You see, most folks learn woodworking the opposite way that I learned. They start with hand tools and work their way up to more advanced tools. And my journey has been the exact opposite. I started with more advanced tools, I got a CNC pretty early on, and now I'm trying to go back and learn the basics. I mean, I'm definitely not a classically trained woodworker, and that's okay. I mean, think about some of your favorite musical artists and whether or not you care if they're classically trained. Chances are you don't care. And for the same reason, it doesn't matter when it comes to any other discipline. But unfortunately, there's always going to be those ones out there who gatekeep the profession while romanticizing the pre-power tool days. And that's fine. I mean, like what you like, but to suggest that the word carving should only be reserved for work done by the human hand is, well, it's just dumb. Woodworking gets to be exactly what you want it to be. I mean, there's really only 2 requirements when it comes to being a woodworker, and spoiler alert, it's already in the name. 1, you have to do some work. 2, that work has to be with wood. That's it. And beyond that, if you want to get into woodworking yourself, there are a bunch of different styles and ways to do so.
And the toughest part I hear from people is, how do I get started? And that's why I'm excited to share with you the sponsor of today's video, the Woodworkers Guild of America. Now, the first 1,000 of my viewers to click the link down in the description will get a full 1-year premium membership to the Woodworkers Guild of America for only $1.49. And the Woodworkers Guild of America is your online resource for all things woodworking, including instructional videos, project ideas and information, and so much more. And it's all centered around a passionate community of woodworkers who are expressing their creativity and mastering their craft. And did I mention you get all of that for $1.49 for a full year? Now, you guys know that here lately, I've really been making a point to learn more hand tool woodworking. And the Woodworkers Guild of America has fantastic instructional videos, everything from hand plane use to hand plane setup to what hand plane is right for different jobs. And I've been using these videos to get better myself, so the Woodworkers Guild of America is for everyone. From the seasoned woodworker looking to get better, to the folks that have never built anything. So if you're looking to get started, get better, or just connect with woodworkers like you, remember, the first 1,000 of my viewers who click the link down in the description will get a full 1-year premium membership to the Woodworkers Guild of America for only $1.49. Thanks to the Woodworkers Guild of America for sponsoring this video.
I needed to make some tenons to slot into mortises on top of the lower cabinets, which I'll cut those later. And this is to allow for the attachment between the uprights and the lower cabinets. And in order to assemble all the upright curve sections, I knew the joints needed something more than just wood glue, as this is an end grain to end grain glue up, which is the weakest of all glue joints. And during the design phase of this build, I sort of puzzled over how I was going to do this. And it was definitely one of those things where I was just like, oh, I'll just let future Jonny handle that one. So here's future Jonny, or I guess at this point it's past Jonny. But regardless, this is what I came up with. And yes, you see me using the Festival Domino machine to cut in the mortises, but I'm not going to use typical domino tenons. I'm using these Festival Domino connectors, and I think I've only ever used these one time before when I built my daughter's bed, and I forgot all about having these. But this works like some of that knockdown furniture that you may have bought from like IKEA or something like that and put together yourself. And one side has a post that fits through a nut placed on the opposing face. And then I'm adding some glue just for some additional strength here, even though it's not going to be the strongest glue joint. But when I put these two parts together, I insert a set screw that slots down into the groove on that post. And then that groove is slightly offset, so as the set screw tightens, it pulls the joint together. And I'll tell you right here, by itself, this wasn't the most secure joint. I mean, after the glue up, there were some sections that would twist a little, but I am confident here that as I get the entire upper shelf assembly assembled, these joints will get a lot more sturdy as they're no longer going to be supporting all of the weight by themselves. So I'll quickly show you the glue up of the center dividers and the middle shelf on one of the lower cabinets. And these are the stop dados that I cut earlier, but there's no point in making you watch another cabinet glue up. So I'm just going to jump ahead in time to when both lower cabinets are all assembled. Now, one tip JCats told me when making these box joints is to cut the grooves about a 1/64 of an inch too deep. Since you can always just sand away the excess material left over, but you would have to sand the entire panel if they were too shallow. And again, you can see more of those gaps that I'll need to fill later on. But beyond that, this is looking really good. So here I'm busting out my hand plane to clean up the box joints after all that sanding. And I think I do understand why folks are so passionate about using hand tools. I mean, there's something really satisfying about smoothing down a piece of wood with a hand plane. If I had to pick my biggest weakness about furniture design, it's that door handles and drawer pulls are usually an afterthought. And I don't like using store-bought versions, especially when you can just make something yourself that's much more interesting. So that's what I'm gonna do with these two drawers. And again, I busted out the Shaper Origin to carve these. And the idea is to cut in a circle recess. And then with contrasting purple heart wood, I'll cut out the mating strip that's gonna slot down in. And sure, it's not that much to grab onto when pulling the drawer out, but really, that's all you need. And again, I think it looks so much better than some of the store-bought solutions. Before I assemble the drawers, I do need to do a few gap fills. Now, the fit of that little Purple Heart pull is really tight, but there were a couple small gaps that I'll fill with glue and some walnut sawdust. For being such a simple looking project, I was surprised just how long this build took me to complete. Now, I expected to have this built in 3 weeks total, but it took me about 5 weeks. And the thing that I underestimated was just how many little steps there were to go along the way. And I don't do myself any favors trying to overcomplicate this simple build. And maybe Katie knew what she was talking about when she asked me to recreate the original supposed mid-century modern design. Emphasis on supposed mid-century modern. I actually dug a little deeper on that macabre piece listed on that auction website for $11,500. And it turns out not all is as it seems, but more on that here in a bit. Every project that I build for our home, my wife and I go through the same back and forth where she wants something simple and elegant, while I want to make something bold and flashy. And don't get me wrong, building furniture my wife asked me for is one of my favorite things to do on this planet, and I get to do that for a living. So to be clear, I'm not complaining here. I think I'm just ready to admit that sometimes she's right. Emphasis on sometimes. And the further I go along in this piece, the more I find myself thinking, oh, this could actually be sort of cool. I mean, don't tell her I said that, but maybe she's right when she wants to keep it simple. Because as this project draws out longer and longer, what seemed like it was going to be a quick build is really death by 1,000 cuts. And I think another one of my flaws when it comes to building furniture is estimating the time a project is going to take. Like, just putting these uprights together to go from that 3D model to design files to CNC files to template cutting on the CNC to then discarding those templates back to the CNC to cut on the wood directly to then cutting that on the bandsaw, flush trimming, sanding, cutting the dominoes, putting them together to squaring up the rounded corners of the dados that will hold the shelves. And in my head, all of that was like 3 steps instead of the 12 that it actually was. So with those uppers completed, I can finally fit in the shelves, which is what I'm getting cut to fit right now. I'm going to clamp these in temporarily because the next step I need to do is to lay out all of the vertical dividers on the shelves. And I'm going to make these with panel slotting into more of those stop dados, which means I get another chance to use my new toy because the layout here is critical. That top divider was already baked into the design, but I'm just sort of winging it on the remaining dividers. Now, these dividers are going to be spaced 5 inches apart, moving outwards from the center. And the trick is to be as accurate as possible, transferring those dimensions from one shelf down to the next. Getting back to that original piece this whole project was designed around, and I decided to do a little bit more digging because something just felt off. I mean, I was aware of Paul McCoy, but it's not like I could pick out one of his pieces out of a lineup. So as I was researching this video, I decided to learn more about Paul McCoy, and immediately I discovered that that post on First Dibs is a total fraud. I mean, Paul McCoy's signature design style is much different than what I'm currently building. And as I looked through old catalogs of Paul McCoy furniture, nothing looked anything like the piece that I was currently recreating. As a matter of fact, I quickly realized there is no way this is an actual McCoy piece based on all of his other furniture that has a very distinct aesthetic, which consists of minimalist pieces where the legs are often very thin and sort of spindly. And here's a couple examples. And I'm not saying I'm an expert here. I could be completely wrong, but by my estimation, this is 100% not a Paul McCoy original piece. And that First Dibs listing is a complete fraud. As a matter of fact, when I dug even further trying to figure out who to attribute this design to, I couldn't find anyone. And I will say, if you know, please let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious. And in the minuscule chance that I am completely wrong and this is actually a Paul McCoy original piece, please provide some evidence in the comment section, and I'll even pin you to the top. I can promise you there's not going to be a pinned comment because this is not an original Paul McCoy piece.
Andy, what is it with doors that I seem to have the most trouble? It's a freaking slab that you cut up into rectangles. Shouldn't be too hard. Once again, on a project, I think I need to remake the doors because this just doesn't look good at all to me. I think it wasn't that exciting of a slab to do a book match glue up like this. I'll save this for something else. Charcuterie boards for the family for Christmas, maybe? I don't know. But Andy, I think the right move is to remake the doors. Doors are the bane of my existence.
Beyond just taking longer than it should, the biggest issue I had building this piece was having to remake the doors. And if you watched that last video, that's becoming sort of a common theme for me. Although having to remake these for a second time feels like a huge win compared to building 5 sets of doors before I was happy on the last build. But this time around, I'm digging back into my stash of air-dried Oklahoma black walnut. And this stuff just looks so good. I don't know why I just didn't grab one of these slabs to begin with. And the main reason why I didn't like that first set of book match doors is that it sort of fit this piece like a square peg in a round hole. The thing that I really like about this design is that asymmetry within a symmetrical design and sort of how that all plays together. And that first set of doors just didn't fit that aesthetic. So with this version, I have a straight edge across the top and then a live edge across the bottom, and that sort of fits that theme. It's essentially both symmetrical and asymmetrical at the same time. And again, to save time, I'm cutting these on the CNC after flattening. There is only one more element this build needs that I haven't started yet, and that's the base. And I thought this would be another opportunity to add a fun twist to this build, and that's why I'm working on this part so late in the build. Now, I thought about doing more center keyed box joints to put the base together, but I think that would have looked a bit odd. With the other box joints on the lower cabinet, these are on the sides of the piece, and if I was to add box joints to the base, they would have been visible along the front, and that just seemed like sort of an odd fit to me. So I figured I would just butt joint these together, which looking straight at it, straight on, you're not going to see that joint, which sort of matches the cabinet above. And when I cut the base out, I also cut the plugs to fill in the holes left on the uppers from those festal connectors. Now, these are all going to be on the back of the uprights, but my OCD just wouldn't allow me to leave these unfilled. Just even talking about the idea of not filling these holes just makes my skin crawl. Okay, it's time to attach the uprights to the lower cabinet, but I have to cut in the mortises for those tenons I made earlier to connect the upper assembly to the lower cabinets. Plus, there is one more vertical divider that needs to be installed, which means that I'm going to go ahead and cut in another dado on top of those lower cabinets. So I decided to break out the Shaper Origin again, and this is such a fun tool to use. And to be clear, Shaper is in no way a sponsor. I mean, I bought this unit myself, and they've never paid me a dime. Although when I bought this unit, they did send me a couple accessories for free. But mainly, it's just a rad tool. And when accuracy is key, like it is cutting in these mortises to match the tenons on the upper assembly, using a tool like this is a massive time saver. Or maybe it's a shortcut. I mean, probably, but isn't that the point? I'm all for doing things the hard way for the sake of doing things the hard way, but sometimes I just have to get shit done. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm literally working with wood. Ergo, the shaper origin is woodworking. And if you disagree, that's okay. I just want you to know that you're completely wrong. Your opinion doesn't matter. You're a terrible person. And also, I appreciate you watching my videos. Okay, there are only a few steps to go. And if you watch this far, there's a few things that I do want to say. One, thank you for watching my videos this far. It still blows my mind that some folks find what I do and my ramblings interesting. And honestly, I appreciate all of you. So if you're someone that watched this far into the video, I want to reward you for that. So comment this down below, and in 2 weeks, I'll pick the most interesting comment, and I'll send you a free Jonny Builds t-shirt no matter where you are on the planet. And a quick plug, buying my merch is a great way to support what I do, so check out that link that I've got down below. But also, if you made it this far, clearly you enjoy my process and my ramblings and my builds. And I'm only gonna keep building rad furniture, so make sure you get subscribed. Honestly, it's the best way to support what I do, just by getting subscribed and watching my new videos when they drop. And I don't want to forget about all of you who have done so already. I mean, you folks are amazing. I wish I could give you all giant hugs, but I'm also a wee bit of a germaphobe, so I'm sorry, but that's just not going to happen. But for real, I love y'all. You just saw me glue up the uppers and fill any gaps or tear out, do the final sanding and the water pop, and that means I'm almost done with this project. All I've got left is to cut the doors to the final size and install the door hardware. And after turning my shop into a kill room, I'll go ahead and spray on the finish. And I wasn't kidding earlier when I said I was going to stain this piece black. And I've done this a few times using a few different techniques, but this is my first time using this General Finish Enduro black poly. And y'all, this is the way to go with red oak. I mean, red oak by itself is just sort of ugly. Often it's just really pink and just doesn't look that good. But what isn't ugly is the wood grain, and spraying on the black finish highlights the wood grain while hiding that ugly but affordable red oak. And instead of buying door pulls, I decided to make my own. Again, I did that on the CNC, but I can do this out of more of that red oak and then stain it black. And then last, I'm adding the doors, and this project is finished. So when I started this build, I thought I was going to be recreating a true mid-century modern piece by a renowned designer, and even that didn't excite me. But now I know I recreated a piece of Wayfair furniture, and honestly, how does that make me feel? Actually, really good. Not everything I build has to be crazy and bold and full of skulls and tattoo art. I mean, I've got range. I can also do boring, although I would call this elevated boring. Not every build has to be heavy metal. I mean, sometimes you gotta throw in a little soft dad rock into the mix, like some Michael Bolton or some Jonny, or I don't know, maybe even some Bruce Springsteen. And if the wife likes it, that's all that matters. Now let's go see what Katie thinks.
And ready?
Ready. Oh my gosh, no way. Those look amazing. Oh my God, those are cool. Oh my God, that's cool.
What do you think about the black? Because you did not want me to stain it black.
Right. It actually looks really great in here. Yeah, with the black. And the different tones down here.
Would you say that I'm always right?
No.
Oh, damn it.
Can you shut him?
Good job.
Say, good job, Daddy.